Well, good evening to everyone. I'm going to move this lectern up just a bit. I already feel distant enough from everyone, and a few feet can make a difference. So I felt like I should apologize. Have you ever had a day when it just seems like you're constantly behind? I experience a lot of those days. And I've got an 8 o'clock class, so I left, I thought, early, and I wound up getting there a little later than I wanted, and so the day began. And perhaps foolishly, I did a little bit of woodworking. And at the department, my son has a senior art show coming up, and guess who's helping with frames and framing? And I meant, even when I was dressing this morning, I meant to come home early enough to change. And there were clouds of sawdust all around, and I am not the most fashion-conscious person in the world to begin with. So if you see a piece of sawdust or wood hanging out of my hair or, white powdery patches on my pants, just kindly ignore them, because I didn't have time to do any of that, and I was almost late. So anyway, that's enough about my day. But there are positive things. Everybody look back there. Right there below the clock. It's mounted. Haven't gotten it to work yet, apparently. Brother Dutch was just trying to turn it on. But boy, you don't know how that warms the cockles of my heart. I'm hoping I can get to use it before this quarter is over. My name is Steve Choate, and I've been asked to teach a class, and we are going through the minor prophets. And tonight, our focus is on Obadiah, so I hope everybody did their homework. If you did, you know it didn't take long. Obadiah is the shortest of the minor prophets, but nevertheless, as I've been saying repeatedly, minor prophets with a major message, and this one is a major message as well. So, it's up and going. Hallelujah. All right, well, I won't have to do the roundabout face every time because it's up there now. Obadiah. So we are going to do as I have been doing and recount the various prophets whose messages we've already been considering. Jonah God calls the Assyrian Ninevites and the prophet as well to repentance. Amos, God judges the nations, Israel's sentence is pronounced. Hosea, God condemns the spiritual adultery of Israel through the lives of Hosea and his wife Gomer. Micah, God's will is done. Israel is taken into exile by the Assyrians due to her sin, never to return. Zephaniah, God warns Judah and the surrounding kingdoms of coming punishment. Nahum, God's will is done. Nineveh is overthrown and Assyria falls to the Babylonians. And then last week, our focus was on Habakkuk. Once more, God's will is done. Judah is taken into exile around 587, 586 BC. God's actions are questioned by Habakkuk on behalf of the people. Habakkuk affirms faith in God. So tonight, Obadiah is, like all of these others, in some ways very different from all of the others, because Obadiah is not a pronouncement against either Judah, who is either taken into captive or in the process of being taken into captivity, or Israel, the northern kingdom, long since gone by this time. Moreover, it's not a pronouncement against social ills or religious problems. Rather, it is a denunciation against the people of Edom, Israel's neighbor, and now I speak of the entire people of Israel, directly to the south of the kingdom of Judah. And so the author, Obadiah, means servant of the Lord. And there are apparently 13 men with this name in the Old Testament, but there is no reason to associate the prophet with any of them. Due to this and the fact that the text of Obadiah is not quoted or echoed in the New Testament, we know nothing about the life or personality of the prophet. Now, I've made statements like this in the past, and then well-intentioned, loving brethren have come up and said, you need to look a little more closely. So this time I'm reading from Dr. Lewis's book. Dr. Lewis says Obadiah is one of the 7 Old Testament books: Nahum, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther, Song of Songs, Ecclesiastes, and Obadiah, that are not quoted or echoed in the New Testament. However, the 12 prophets were already recognized in Judaism earlier than the New Testament period. So they are recognized prophets, but Obadiah is one of these 7 who is not quoted or echoed in the New Testament. So the date of Obadiah's ministry is challenging, and Dr. Lewis explores this a little bit. Guesses range from 850 BC to 312 BC, so far before and long after the time that I am going for. It just seems logical to me when you read the text, particularly in relation to other texts. I'm thinking here particularly of Jeremiah and also Amos, that the calamity that has occurred in Jerusalem is relative to the events that are taking place about 586, maybe a little earlier, 587 BC, which constitute the Babylonians coming in and taking the people of the southern kingdom, the kingdom of Judah, into exile. And so I'm opting for around 586, 583 BC, because this just seems to me to be the most logical date for this book. The basic message. Well, I've already given you a spoiler on that one. Obadiah is the shortest book in the Hebrew Bible. It is an oracle or vision against the Edomite nation. And again, I've mentioned that unlike other prophetic messages, the text offers no expression of condemnation on the part of the people of God, nor does it offer an expression of hope or element of mercy to those who are being condemned, the people of Edom. The purpose seems not so much to warn Edom, but simply to convey that God's justice will be done upon the kingdom of Edom. And I don't know if this would add any belated comfort to the people of Judah because they are being taken into captivity, but there is a long-standing problem between these people, as I'm sure we know if we know our Old Testament. The structure of the book, and once more, this is the shortest one of the minor prophets. There are not even any chapters, so they're just 21 verses. So the structure of the book is very simple. Obadiah, verses 1 through 14, due to her cruelties toward Israel, the people of Edom will be driven out of their strongholds by faithless allies. And these allies are not specifically named, but the odds are, if in fact our dating is correct, and it's 586 to 583 BC, that these are the Neo-Babylonians, the very people who are responsible for the overthrow of Assyria, the conquest of Judah and taking the people of Judah into captivity, and the former allies of the Edomites during the conquest of Jerusalem, so recently occurring. And then we have Obadiah verses 15 through 21, which is yet again a prediction of the day of the Lord. But here there is some hope extended in promises that the people of Judah will return and Israel will ultimately be victorious. So these are the standard things I've been sharing with you: the author, date, basic message, and essential structure. And once more, I think I'm going to just read this. It's only 21 verses long. And that way we can have the satisfaction of having the entire text fresh in our mind as we consider some various details relative to the text. So, Obadiah, verse 1. The vision of Obadiah. Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom. We have heard a report from the Lord, and a messenger has been sent among the nations, saying, Arise, and let us rise up against her for battle. So this is apparently a messenger that comes from God, not Obadiah, but presumably some angelic messenger that in this vision that Obadiah is having is making this prophetic message. Verse 2, Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You shall be greatly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who dwell in the clefts of the rock, whose habitation is high, you who say in your heart, Who will bring me down to the ground? Though you ascend as high as the eagle, and though you set your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, says the Lord. If thieves had come to you, if robbers by night, how you will be cut off. Would they not have stolen till they had enough? If grape gatherers had come to you, would they not have left some gleanings? Oh, how Esau shall be searched out, how his hidden treasure shall be sought after. All the men in your confederacy shall force you to the border. The men at peace with you shall deceive you and prevail against you. Those who eat your bread shall lay a trap for you. No one is aware of it. Will I not in that day, says the Lord, even destroy the wise men from Edom and understanding from the mountains of Esau? Then your mighty men, O Teman, shall be dismayed, to the end that everyone from the mountains of Esau may be cut off by slaughter. For violence against your brother, shame will cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. In the day that you stood on the other side, in the day that strangers carried captive his forces, when foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, even you were as one of them. But you should not have gazed on the day of your brother, in the day of his captivity, nor should you have rejoiced over the children of Israel in the day of their destruction, nor should you have spoken proudly in the day of distress. You should not have entered the gate of my people in the day of their calamity. Indeed, you should not have gazed on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. You should not have stood at the crossroads to cut off those among them who escaped, nor should you have delivered up those among them who remained in the day of distress. So let's pause a bit and reflect. This is all being spoken according to our understanding by some messenger from God in this vision that Obadiah is experiencing. So this person is speaking on God's behalf, and therefore the personal pronoun I is a reference obviously to God. And so this is, although spoken by another and ultimately delivered by Obadiah, the human prophet, this is a divine pronouncement. And it is full of condemnation against this specific people. I want you to note in particular verse 3, where he's just beginning to make the indictment against them. He says, you who dwell in the clefts of the rock. Now in Greek, rock is Petra. In Hebrew, it's Selah. So this may be purely descriptive, but it may be something of a pun, because Selah is one of the fortifications, one of the fortified cities of the Edomites. Well, later on, the people known as the Nabateans, we'll get to that shortly. But Petra is itself a famous place in the world today. It does not date, as far as we know, back to this ancient time, the 6th century BC, much less even before then. But again, the word rock, Petra, is Selah in Hebrew. So it's very likely that the site is the same site. And that's interesting, as we will see. So these are a people who live in, today, a very desert region, and they are proud because they are strong. And the strength is described as if a bird, an eagle, really flying high in the sky, who in that pride thinks that it cannot be touched, that it is secure, that it is safe. Moreover, these people are very wealthy, partly because the land in which they live, trade routes will pass through this land, not only in this time and before, but long, very long after, even into Roman times, into the 2nd century. And because of the trade that is siphoning through this area from far off to the east, they're wealthy. But they're also wealthy because of their mining. Copper and other metals are mined in this region, and this adds to the wealth of the people of Edom. And then there's some metaphors given as regards what's going to happen. Thieves coming by night, and grape gatherers, and they'll take all they want, but there will be more left. And that is what is being referred to in verse 5 and also verse 6, how his hidden treasures shall be sought after. And then the prophet is speaking now in the vision from the messenger about faithless allies, confederates and violets who have laid a trap, who have planned a plan that will turn upon these people, and no one, he says, will be aware of it. Even the wise will be deceived. The mighty men will be useless. And the reference is made not infrequently in the Old Testament to Teman. Teman is the name apparently of a clan within the Edomite population. It's also the name of one more of the fortifications of the peoples of Edom. So their strongholds are Basra, the capital, far up to the north in the kingdom. Teman, way down south. And then Petra is the name, the later name for Selah, presumably, which is also south of Basra. And then the indictment really takes place because he is now, verses 10 onward, speaking of the things that are really leading to this prophecy of destruction. Violence against your brother Jacob. Shame will cover you. Because on that day you stood on the other side. You did not ally yourself with your brother Jacob, the people of Judah. Rather, you were on the side of the enemies, and you did many terrible things. You took captives. When foreigners entered the gates, you cast lots. You apparently helped in the looting. You gazed upon them in their day of defeat. And rather than aiding them, you gloated over them and again aided the enemy. And as if all of that weren't enough, you really cut off the retreat of those who would otherwise have been able to make their way to freedom. And you delivered, moreover, those among them who took refuge with you to the enemy. So these are really terrible indictments that God is making against the people of Edom, the children of Esau, because they have abandoned the children of Judah or Jacob. Now let's complete this, verses 15 on through 21. So this is the hopeful part that offers the idea of restoration to the people of Israel. For the day of the Lord upon all the nations is near. And I want you also, with that in your mind, to hearken back to the very first lesson I shared with you after Jonah, and that is Amos. Remember Amos, when he is called from the south to the north to the kingdom of Israel, he begins his prophecies by indicting all of the surrounding nations of the divided kingdoms of Israel and Judah. Among them, Edom, their close brother to the south. And so it appears now that this is the day that Amos prophesied about over 100 years earlier, a couple of hundred years earlier, from remembering my dates, is now coming to pass, or shortly will be coming to pass. As you have done, it shall be done to you. Your reprisal shall return upon your own head, for as you drank on my holy mountain, so shall all the nations drink continually. Yes, they shall drink and swallow, and they shall be as though they had never been. But on Mount Zion, this is the reference to the holy mount, to the heart of Jerusalem, there shall be deliverance, and there shall be holiness. The house of Jacob shall possess their possessions. The house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. But the house of Esau, the Edomites, shall be stubble. They shall kindle them and devour them, and no survivor shall remain of the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken. The south shall possess the mountains of Esau, and the lowland shall possess Philistia. They shall possess the fields of Ephraim and the fields of Samaria. Benjamin shall possess Gilead, and the captives of this host of the children of Israel shall possess the land of the Canaanites. As far as Zarephath, the captives of Jerusalem who are in Sepharad shall possess the cities of the south. Then saviors or deliverers shall come to Mount Zion to judge the mountains of Esau, and the kingdom shall be the Lord's. So what he's describing here is the fact that the kingdom of Judah, so recently taken away, or literally in the process of being taken away, depending upon the dates, that they will return. And not only shall they take control of Zion, but they'll also take control of all of the surrounding territories. Philistia off to the west on the coast of the Levant, the eastern seaboard of the Mediterranean, Samaria to the north, Gilead, all of this land, formerly the divided kingdom, shall go back to God's people in due time. Well, this is what Obadiah has to tell us. Any thoughts, questions, or comments about any of that? All right. Well, I have from time to time shown you images. I'm an art history teacher, and I love painting in particular, of various Old Testament scenes that are being recreated. You don't know it because I didn't draw any attention to this, but the work up here by James Tissot, that's his English name. I've actually shown a work by him before. If you remember last Wednesday, I showed you a beautiful painting that he executed in which he recreated the scene of the opening lines of Psalm 137, "By the rivers of Babylon we lay down and wept." Tissot was a Frenchman, actually. And in 1885, he was born in 1836, he experienced a renewal of his Catholic faith and painted dozens of New Testament paintings depicting the life of Jesus, became a very famous painter, and was engaged in a series of paintings on the Old Testament before his death in 1902. And I found this one, which before I taught this lesson, I didn't know he had painted this one. But he's a marvelous academic artist, recreating scenes of Old Testament times. As you can see, this depicts the flight of the prisoners, or descriptively, the exile of the Jews into Babylonian captivity. And so that's the scene that's going on at this point in time, or thereabouts this point in time, in which the people of Judah, the southern kingdom, are taken into captivity. And so it's in this context, or near context historically, that Obadiah is engaged in his prophecy. And here's my map again. If you thought that we would have a Wednesday night class without a map, I always need a map. So as you're looking at the map, you should notice in the upper right hand, Neo-Babylonian Empire. All of this territory has either been conquered outright or is in the process of being so. And the area down to the south, right below the Dead Sea, here's some color to highlight it, is the kingdom of Edom. And so it is apparently one of the last to fall because the Edomites are conquered by the Babylonians in the 6th century. And let's see, there's Jerusalem. And then the star south of the Dead Sea is Bozrah. And then way down south is Petra, a city that has been called by some the Rose-Red City, half as old as time. And Dr. Lewis talks about Petra because he believes that the fortification of the Edomites of this period, Selah, is the same site. And I think there's very good reason for that assumption. And we will briefly visit Petra today, even though the buildings that are there today date largely from the 2nd century Roman times, High Imperial period. Nevertheless, it's, I think, worth a visit because it shows us something of the sense of the confidence that the Edomites had in their very rough wilderness homeland, because this is a place riven by mountains and gullies and canyons, very high canyons and mountains in some instances, and made of rock, red rock. This is why it's called Edom, the land of the red. Today, this is the Transjordan area. Southern Israel and the modern nation of Jordan are there today. So this conflict is very, very ancient. It goes all the way back to the patriarchs. And I hope everybody admires my two actors here. I pieced this together. I looked online for a red-bearded man, an angry man, and another man, and I put those together, and I thought that worked really well. So you know who these are supposed to be. These are supposed to be Esau, the red man, the wild man, the hunter, the man of the fields and of the hunt, and his twin brother Jacob, the man of the tents. And although they were twins, there could not have been two twins more dissimilar than Jacob and Esau. And as we know, their conflict began in the womb. And God said that this conflict will continue on. In effect, Rebekah, their mother, had two nations in her womb in contention with one another. And so it would stay throughout their lives and throughout the lives of their children and their children's children. And we know that Jacob is a trickster. And unfortunately, Isaac, their father, and Rebekah, their mother, play favorites, which heightens the animosity between these two. I try to pack in little sermons every now and then when I can, and when I cover anything that relates to Jacob and Esau, or for that matter, Joseph and his 12 brothers, I always tell my students, don't ever play favorites with their children. Nothing good ever comes of that. It's always a bad thing. So Esau is always getting the short end of the stick, and Jacob is always beating Esau. And so we read after the last trick that Jacob pulled, where he got the father's blessing, the blessing of the firstborn, rather than it being bestowed upon the eldest, Esau, the favorite son of their father Isaac. We're told in chapter 27 of Genesis, verse 41, so Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, then I will kill my brother Jacob. That gives me the willies. You know, just think about somebody hating you so much that this is premeditated murder here. And this is not a stranger and another stranger. These are brothers, twin brothers. But such was the rift between them, such was the deep hatred in Esau's heart that he was planning to kill Jacob. And Jacob was no fool. He knew of this, and so did their mother, Rebekah. So as we know the story unfolding, he goes off to Ramah in order to get away from from Esau. But along the way, he also is looking for a wife, and thus that story goes on. So the rift between these brethren is very deep. And as we know, the people of Edom are the children of Esau, his descendants, as the people of Judah and Israel are the children of Israel or Jacob. Well, The animosity, of course, doesn't begin and end there. It continues on throughout the history of these two estranged brothers. And so I'm flipping over to Numbers chapter 20, because now we're in the period of the Exodus. After several hundred years, the people are about to come back home from Egyptian slavery, and they are poised to pass through this region. In Numbers chapter 20, verses 14 through 17, I do have it on the PowerPoint if my font is legible to you. I think it is. Ironically, I can read this better than I can read that. I'm still glad to have it. Thrilled. So verses 14 through 17. Now Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom in Bozrah. Thus says your brother Israel, you know all the hardship that has befallen us, how our fathers went down to Egypt, and we dwelt in Egypt a long time, and the Egyptians afflicted us and our fathers. When we cried out to the Lord, he heard our voice and sent the angel and brought us up out of Egypt. Now here we are in Kadesh, a city on the edge of your border. Please, let us pass through your country. We will not pass through fields or vineyards, nor will we drink water from wells. We will go along the king's highway. We will not turn aside to the right hand or to the left until we have passed through your territory. So that's the plea that Moses sends by messengers to the king of Edom, presumably in Bozrah on the threshold of the border of the land of the Edomites. And it is appropriately for the offspring of the younger brother, it is humble. And it is begging and pleading. And they're vowing to do no harm, not to disturb any of the grain or pick any of the grapes from the vineyards, just to go straight through. That's all they want. Just straight, safe passage without any violence being incurred upon them. So how does Edom respond? Verses 18 through 21. Then Edom said to him, you shall not pass through my land, lest I come out against you with the sword. So the children of Israel said to him, they make another plea, we will go by the highway, and if I or my livestock drink any of your water, then I will pay for it. Let me only pass through on foot, nothing more. Then he said, you shall not pass through. So Edom came out against them with many men and with a strong hand. Thus Edom refused to give Israel passage through his territory, so Israel turned away from him. Well, that is very harsh. And in consequence, the long-standing historical feud between their forefathers, Esau and Jacob, are continued and will continue really till the end of the culture of the people of Edom. The psalmist in chapter 6, verse 8, speaks of this when he says, and I quote, Moab is my washpot. Moab is another fallen kindred of the people of Israel. Over Edom will I cast out my shoe. And I'm not exactly sure of the contemptuous reference there, but it's apparently bad. And in fact, in the Torah and Mosaical law, this is also reflected, because the people of Israel, and I'm speaking of the entire nation, could not receive descendants of a marriage between an Israelite and an Edomite until the fourth generation. So if an Israelite and an Edomite married, their children could not enter into the congregation of the children of Israel, nor could their children's children or their children's children's children. It would have to be their children's 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 children, if I got my generations right. So again, this is a deep enmity between these people that has only been fueled over time by the hatred of the people of Edom. And then let's remember Amos. I'm not going to have us go all the way back to Amos, but I will quote the relevant passage here from Amos, which is chapter 1, verses 11 through 12. And we read there from the prophet, "For 3 generations of Edom and for 4, I will not turn away its punishment, because he pursued his brother with the sword and cast off all pity. His anger tore perpetually, and he kept his wrath forever. But I will send a fire upon Teman, which shall devour the palaces of Bozrah." So in this particular context, Teman just means the south. It is a fortress of the people of Edom, but it's apparently far south, and because of this, it became a synonymous term for the people of Israel for just the south in general, and Edom is the south. And so Amos specifically mentions not only the south as in Teman and Edom, but also the palaces of the capital, Bozrah. So this is what that land looks like today. Here you have a view of Edom today. This is the Jordan, the area of the Jordan. And this is a very ancient land, as we all know, and so the people are very ancient as well. Archaeology has uncovered remnants of peoples who lived in this region, presumably these very people, the Edomites, going all the way back to the 13th century. They're at their height in the 8th century BC, but then they go into a decline, and they are destroyed, in fact, by the Babylonians in the 6th century BC, the time that we're in now. And as you can see, this is riven, divided by deep valleys and hills and towering cliffs and mountains. And a little bit more of information here. The earliest significant remains at Busirah, this is the modern name. Oh, I'm out of order here. So Bozrah, as I've said, is the capital of Edom. Bozrah means sheepfold or enclosure in Hebrew. The modern city of Busirah preserves the name and location of ancient Bozrah, presumably the pastoral capital of the Edomites. And as I was saying a moment ago, the earliest significant remains at Busirah are from 800 BC, but once more, archaeology goes all the way back to the 13th century BC. It has the largest Iron Age buildings found in the Transjordan, among which perhaps was the king's palace. And here you have a view of some of the archaeological remains of the ancient site of Bozrah or Busirah. And a couple of things that I thought of interest here. Jeremiah in chapter 49, verse 13, the I is God. "I swear by myself, declares the Lord, that Bozrah will become I can't read my own writing, a ruin." I was about to say a min. What's a min? "A ruin and a curse, an object of horror and reproach, and all its towns will be in ruin forever." And then another point of interest. According to Isaiah chapter 63, verses 1 through 6, and this is an interesting passage, but I'm not going to take the time to read it in its entirety. Isaiah speaks of the Lord coming from Edom and Bozrah in blood-stained clothing. And also of interest here is Revelation chapter 9, verse 13, because we read there of a vision of John where Christ appears on a white horse covered in blood-stained clothing. So that's, I think, really interesting and connects both Old and New Testaments, at least in terms of the imagery of Christ as a sacrifice as well as one who acts on behalf of God in the day of vengeance. So, not much there in the ancient ruins of Edomite Bozrah. I should have pointed out on the map, but it skipped my mind, that on my map off to the east of the kingdom of Edom is the Nabatew Arabs. So these are nomadic peoples of ancient Arabia, today Saudi Arabia, who are moving through this area in the age-old practice of tending goats and sheep and other things, carrying their livestock from place to place. After Edom is overthrown, the 6th century BC, these Nabateans come into possession of this land and they settle down. And in time, they become the aid and the ally of the Romans. The Romans want a piece of the commercial action because parts of the road of commerce going all the way off to the east pass through this area. The major channels of what's known as the Silk Road go up to the north, but there is commerce going through this area. And because of this, the Nabateans, like the ancient Edomites, become very wealthy because they're sort of the middleman in this trade route. And so they take this rough and rugged land and they further develop it in token of the culture, the dominant culture of that time, which is Greco-Roman. So what we're looking at here is a narrow passageway known as the Sick, or the Sikit. Literally, this means the shaft. And as I've noted here, it is a dim, narrow gorge. In some places, it's no more than 10 feet. In others, it opens up to about 30 feet wide, and somewhere between 299 to 597 feet in height, winding its way approximately 3/4 of a mile to a mile. I don't know why you have varying dimensions on a measurable space, but I've got both. Ending at the most elaborate of the ruins of Petra, of the ancient people of Nabatea. And this is known, here's a view of the very end of the Sikh, where you have this narrow crack, and then you go through that, and here's what you see. This is called Al-Khazna, and it's also known as the treasury, because apparently of the great wealth that was discovered here when it was rediscovered. But it is one of the great buildings of the Nabateans, following the fashion of the Greco-Roman world. What's amazing about this building is it's really not a building at all. It's a great sculpture. This entire face is carved out of the living rock of the cliff wall. So the great pediment here, the great columns, this tholos, a rounded element here, which itself is capped off, the broken pediment behind that, all of that is carved out of the living rock face by the assiduous efforts of these Nabatean people in the Greco-Roman fashion. Pediments and columns like this come right out of Greece and Rome. But these are a subject people, subject to the authority of Rome. They know where the power lies. It lies in Rome. Rome dominates the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean is referred to by the Romans in this period as our lake, our sea, because Roman land surrounds it all around. And so that's the real power of the time. And in token of that, the Nabateans carve and create this building and others in the Greco-Roman tradition. Here's another view of Al-Khazna. Those are people. So this is about 40 meters in height, somewhere between 120 and 130 feet. And this is just the exterior. This is not the building inside. So this is an amazing work, and really an amazing testament to man's inventiveness and his abilities to do amazing things and burrowing all of this out of the solid rock. But the really important point here, because Petra comes in the 2nd century, long after the fall of the Edomites in the 6th century BC, the important point is that this may be the site of Selah. Again, the Hebrew means the rock. Greek Petra means the rock. And the hard to get to, almost inaccessible Sikh would make this a very, very strong fortification, a natural fortification. Because to pass through and to get to this site, you have to go through this narrow gorge, the sick. Therefore, a very small army could hold off a vast force. Such is the narrow confines of this passageway. And so this is the mistaken pride of the Edomites, if indeed their Selah, the Edomite Selah, was located here in Arabian Petra, because they took pride in their strongholds, their fortifications, and they felt themselves to be secure, literally unassailable. No enemy could get at them. They were like the eagle flying in the sky, untouchable. Well, they were wrong. They were wrong, because nothing stands against the power of God and his tools, even if they be tools of disservice. Well, as impressive as the treasury is, it is not alone. So the peoples of Nabatea, no doubt like the Edomites before them, not only constructed buildings out of quarried stone and rock, but they also tunneled and carved into these forbidding rock cliff faces. And so there is some understandable reason for the false confidence of the Edomites, given the nature of their land and its natural fortification-like qualities. But it would prove to be a mistaken confidence because, again, they are facing God, and there is no way to prevent or avoid his pronouncements of judgment. So before our time is up, Edom's errors. First of all, pride, and I've been touching upon that in terms of their wealth and also a false sense of self-confidence. But in particular, as we've seen from the Old Testament passages that I've shared with you, forsaking a brother in time of need. And I was tempted, and I'm afraid I could not endure the temptation. I love words, and so I was tempted to share a word with you that you may not be familiar with, but we may in time, because it is making inroads into popular culture. Unfortunately, it is used to frame an emotion that on occasion, if we're not careful, we can all be victims of this emotion. But I'm happy to say it's not an English or an American word, it's German. No offense to any Germans or people of German extraction here. Schadenfreude. Has anybody heard of this word? Schadenfreude. Okay, a couple of people have. I actually heard a little element on public radio about a year ago about Schadenfreude, and that was an interesting thing. So it's making inroads. What is Schadenfreude? It's what the Edomites were guilty of. It is the experience of pleasure, joy, or self-satisfaction that comes upon learning or witnessing the troubles, failures, or humiliation of another. So if you've ever had an enemy, however you want to define that word, and they failed at something, they failed to get the promotion, maybe they just stumbled and fell over, and you're like, you experienced Schadenfreude. It's not a good thing. God doesn't like it, and we need to avoid it. The Edomites certainly were rejoicing over the failures and the humiliation of Israel in 586 BC. So we have yet another use of this phrase of the day of the Lord. And I would remind you that this basically means God's will be done. And Dr. Lewis is of the opinion, and I am as well, that every time we encounter this in the minor prophets, the reference here is actually to something locked in historical time. Whoops. Okay. I'm still struggling myself with my own organization of the material in the face of the unchronological expression of it in the Old Testament. Okay, so as we are concluding here, we have really verses 19 through 21, which offer promise of Israel's return and the lands formerly taken from her that she will regain. And so there's a lot of positive element throughout all of this. The house of Jacob shall be a fire, the house of Joseph a flame, and then the house of Esau, on the other hand, shall be stubble. So I'm not a farmer or the son of a farmer, second generation Mississippi farmer. My grandfather on my father's side was. But I think we all know that stubble is what's left after the harvest is brought in, and as I tried to illustrate there, it is burned. It burns quickly to prepare the soil for fresh crops, and there's really no benefit to stubble other than the burning of it. And that's the way Edom will go. Well, in conclusion, practical application, I've pretty much shared this already with you in terms of Edom's mistakes. How can we avoid those mistakes? We need to strive to avoid pride. We need to strive not to hold resentment if we feel ourselves to be wronged. We need to be sensitive to the need of others, better yet, serve those needs. And as with other practical applications that I've recommended to you, I know that there are more, but these are the most prominent ones that came to my mind. Any last minute thoughts or observations? Well, my original intention after tonight was to forge on and next week to cover Haggai, but we have covered a fair amount of rich history, and I had built up some images that I wanted to share in conjunction with some of the thoughts about the taking of the people of Israel into Assyrian captivity, 586 BC, the taking of Judah into Babylonian captivity. And so I think we're going to have a little break, a little interlude. I'm going to share with you some of those images taken from artists of today, some images that deal with archaeology and archaeological finds that reinforce this ancient history, make some observations, and then after that, the week following, it's my plan to go into Haggai, another one of the short books. So that's the plan. Let's have a word of prayer as we close. Father, thank you for this day that you blessed us with. This day and the last several days have been beautiful. And we thank you for the spring and the mellowing temperatures and the beautiful sunny skies after the violent rains. We know, however, that many have suffered over this last weekend, particularly those throughout Texas and Louisiana and Mississippi due to these violent storms and tornadoes. I pray that you would bless them. I pray that you would bless the congregations around them, that they might extend the hand to help their brothers that is needed during this time. I pray that you might help us as a body, help those people who are in need as best as we can. Moreover, in conjunction with tonight's lesson, Father, I pray that we would not make the mistake of the people of ancient Edom, that we would not rejoice in the misfortunes of others, but rather we would be saddened by them, that we would run to aid them as we should, and that we would strive to do everything we can to be your hands and feet in this fallen world. Thank you for the word that you've given us and the light it is to our path. I pray that you would help us all as individuals and as a collective body to always walk in that path. Thank you for all of our many blessings, especially for our spiritual blessings. But of them, I thank you most of all for Christ. And it's in his precious name that I pray. Amen. Thank you.